Red, White, and Radical, the podcast, is based on the book Red, White, and Radical, What Organizations Can Learn About Change from the Rise of American Conservatism. You can get it from the publisher Routledge and in Amazon and other online stores.
Welcome to Red, White, and Radical, a podcast that explores how American conservatism has changed the world. I'm Warwick Harnese, and in part 3, I'm going to tell the story of how conservative culture has taken over mainstream America. I want to make a case for how we got to Donald Trump. In this episode, I look at how the media connects the grassroots masses with the conservative power elite. And by media, what I really mean is through entertainment. In the process of building their culture change network, conservatives focused intently on building a creative industry of their own. Their content was deliberately entertaining and fantastical. The ideas that they first wrote about in books and pamphlets that made their way into newscasts, radio and TV shows, and now dominate podcasts and live streams, are outrageous, scandalous, and often funny. They use the plain, folksy language of Middle America, and it's proved to be big business.
The conservative followership has been fleeced, exploited, and lied to by the conservative entertainment complex.
That was David Frum, a former speechwriter for neoconservative President George W. Bush. If foreign policy interventionists like Frum are complaining about the unchecked power of conservative propaganda, well, surely there's no smoke without fire. But if it's true that conservative media is just big business ripping off the masses, why has this brand of conservative entertainment been so successful in changing American culture? The answer is in how it bonds people from different parts of the country and different economic classes. Crudely, it lets the rich remotely break bread with, well, everyone else to find common ground. Laughter and outrage around a common cause help with group bonding. Way before social media echo chambers and filter bubbles became a thing, conservatives had worked out how to create communication channels between Main Street and the C-suite. And today's digital technologies have helped strengthen that infrastructure. Social media hasn't replaced the old broadcast channels of the conservative entertainment complex. It's reinforced them.
This is a culture war.
They whip you into a frenzy of racial fear. Unfortunately, it's also destroying the country.
Democrats don't care if they burn down and destroy this nation.
So how did this happen? Well, we need to answer 3 questions. How was the conservative communications infrastructure created? How does folksy language and insult humor connect conservatives? And how does today's digital tech strengthen the conservative entertainment industry?
We live in an age of anxiety, a time of stress, and with all our sophistication, we are in fact the victims of our own technological strength. We are the victims of shock, of future shock.
That's another classic from the early 1970s. Orson Welles narrating a documentary based on Alvin Toffler's best-selling book, Future Shock. In the book, Toffler outlined the ways that technology was changing the world, and more importantly, changing people. He warned of the psychological disease of future shock, a dizzying disorientation brought on by the premature arrival of the future. Toffler was a lifelong liberal, and most of his early devotees in politics were Democrats. In 1975, he was invited by some of those Democrats to hold a meeting with members of Congress to talk about future shock. This was back when bipartisan cooperation was still the rule on Capitol Hill, and Toffler realized he needed to get at least one token Republican to attend.
We made lists of people who would come, and the lists were almost entirely Democrats. And so the question, isn't there a Republican, a futurist someplace? Somebody said, well, there's this guy, Gingrich, in Georgia.
He's talking about Newt Gingrich, and it's ironic because Gingrich was the guy who would later be accused of single-handedly wrecking that spirit of bipartisan cooperation. From government shutdowns to the Tea Party to Donald Trump, the line that connects them all can be traced through Newt Gingrich. But arguably Gingrich's most world-changing contribution to modern conservatism is his role in setting up the analog infrastructure of the media echo chamber. Back when Toffler tapped him to make an appearance at his conference on the future, Gingrich was a history professor in Atlanta. Back then, he had sideburns and a pompadour, and more counterculture students in his class than any other prof because they liked the way he held seminars in a circle on the grass. But Gingrich wasn't just interested in the future. He wanted to direct it. Technology was changing the South, and Atlanta in particular was fast becoming a manufacturing metropolis. Gingrich decided he wanted to be Speaker of the House of Congress, a position that would give him control over how the federal government spends public money. He had a big vision for 21st century America.
In order to understand the scale of change we're living through, let me suggest to you Alvin and Heidi Toffler's Creating a New Civilization. Here in 100 pages is 25 years of work by the couple who wrote Future Shock and coined the phrase in 1970. Books that encompass the scale of change we're living through. In this 100 pages, you'll begin to sense what the 21st century America, the 21st century government, and the 21st century Congress need to be.
Eventually, Gingrich got himself elected to Congress as the representative for the affluent northern suburbs of Atlanta. Feedback from his constituents taught him a valuable lesson. If conservatism was to become mainstream culture, it had to be less confusing and niche. And Gingrich understood that because he was a pragmatic and promiscuous conservative himself. He liked libertarian ideas about tax reduction and deregulation of business, and he liked technology because he wanted to obliterate communism and make sure America stayed the world's only true superpower. But he also agreed with the traditionalists and religious conservatives that American civilization was threatened by rootlessness and social disorder.
Newt is not first and foremost a legislator. He's not even first and foremost a congressman. He is first and foremost a political visionary, a futurist, and a historian. All those things rolled into one. As he would say, I became a congressman because that was a great place to learn things and make speeches where people would listen to me and have an impact.
It was now the 1980s. Conservatism had to promise opportunity for the baby boom generation. The challenge was that boomers were the children of the counterculture. They weren't instinctively conservative. To wrench them away from liberalism towards his vision of a unified, futuristic conservatism, Gingrich would have to destroy the enemy. A politician's chief tool of persuasion is rhetoric, so Gingrich would pioneer the use of language as a divisive political weapon. In 1986, he became chairman of GOPAC, an organization that trains Republicans to be better political campaigners. He recorded instructional tapes that his foot soldiers could listen to in their cars as they drove from one campaign stop to another. The content of the tapes, they were promised, would help them talk like Newt, more emotively, more humorously, and more divisively.
You cannot maintain civilization with 12-year-olds having babies, 15-year-olds shooting each other, 17-year-olds dying of AIDS, and 18-year-olds getting a diploma they can't read.
GOPAC went further. with a short document they titled Language, a Key Mechanism of Control. It was basically 2 lists of words, optimistic, positive, governing words that Republican candidates should use when talking about conservative ideas, and contrasting, negative words they should use when talking about liberal policies. So the positive words included adjectives like courage, dream, freedom, opportunity, tough, unique. And the contrasting words were things like betray, bizarre, coercion, disgrace, pathetic, status quo. Getting the language right was one thing, but they also needed a better route to market. Gingrich wanted to create a 24-hour, two-way communications channel between the grassroots and the conservative elite. Alvin Toffler had inadvertently planted a seed.
Political democracy, by incorporating larger and larger numbers in social decision-making, facilitates feedback. And it is precisely this feedback that is essential to control. To assume control over accelerated change, we shall need more advanced feedback mechanisms.
Gingrich's career in Congress coincided with the launch of C-SPAN, a public service broadcast network that televises the proceedings of government. Gingrich and his fellow radical young conservatives used C-SPAN to communicate their ideas directly to the public, avoiding the filter of a hostile mainstream media. In the early mornings and early evenings, when the chamber of the House of Representatives was empty, Gingrich and co. could deliver uninterrupted monologues direct to consumer via the C-SPAN cameras. Conservative talk radio hosts took notice, listening in for topics they could discuss on their shows. They'd put the C-SPAN arguments out on the air, explaining policy in plain language, to see how listeners responded. To complete the feedback loop, Gingrich could gauge that public response from radio station call-ins and use these insights to advance or block legislation in line with popular sentiment. This was the beta infrastructure of the political echo chamber. And feedback from the echo chamber influenced a package of legislation that Gingrich sponsored. It was called the Contract with America, a promise to bring 10 conservative hot topic items to vote. Conceptually, it was a sensation, helping Republicans win both houses in Congress in 1994 for the first time in 40 years, and elevating Gingrich to the speaker role he coveted. But not only did Gingrich set up the analog infrastructure of the media echo chamber, he inadvertently helped gift the nascent conservative entertainment complex its first great story. Once the contract with America was declared, Gingrich and his allies in Congress went to war. Their opposition to President Bill Clinton's healthcare and education plans was so uncompromising that they forced the first ever extended shutdowns of the federal government. Employees were sent home, and the normally busy offices of the White House were empty and silent. Clinton, frustrated and anxious, lounged listlessly in the Oval Office. Unpaid interns served as a skeleton crew of support staff. One of those interns was Monica Lewinsky.
But I want to say one thing to the American people. I want you to listen to me. I'm going to say this again. I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky.
An independent inquiry into the Clintons' finances had been rumbling on since 1994, without turning up any conclusive evidence of illegal behavior. Suddenly, the inquiry was given a new lease of life by reports of Bill's infidelity, and evidence in the form of a semen-stained blue Gap dress. Hillary Clinton, once a young conservative activist herself, could see exactly what was happening. The day after Bill lied to the media about his affair, Hillary did damage control on primetime breakfast TV.
The great story here, for anybody willing to find it and write about it and explain it, is this vast right-wing conspiracy that has been conspiring against my husband since the day he announced for president.
It wasn't exactly a conspiracy. Conservative media could rightfully claim that they were doing their jobs properly, exercising their rights as members of the free press. But conspiracy theories certainly helped attract audiences. And it was via these stories about the Clintons that the conservative entertainment complex developed its unique and hugely successful style of content. Conservative entertainment pioneers couldn't have had a better antagonist in Bill Clinton. He was deceitful and narcissistic, a morally corrupt product of the counterculture. For that matter, these right-wing entertainers were bad as fuck themselves, a sort of troika of Batman supervillains whose media channels grew rapidly as they gorged on scandals and gossip about Billary.
To the Batmobile.
In the role of Anarchy, the mischievous anti-government troublemaker was Matt Drudge. His website, The Drudge Report, first told the public about the Clinton-Lewinsky affair when mainstream news organizations refused to. In the role of the Penguin, Gotham City's fat cat crime don was Roger Ailes, who in 1996 launched Fox News after tapping Rupert Murdoch for $1 billion he told him he may never see again. And in the role of the Joker, Batman's most enduring adversary with his deadly sense of humor, was Rush Limbaugh, the talk radio shock jock. This was a watershed moment in American culture. During the Clinton presidency, these conservative media masterminds finally smashed the liberal establishment.
Please, whatever you do, leave some liberals alive. I think we should have at least on every college campus one communist professor and 2 liberal professors so we never forget who these people are and what they stand for. We can always show our children what they were and what they want. Living fossils, ladies and gentlemen. Keep them living fossils.
In 1987, Ronald Reagan repealed the Fairness Doctrine, a federal regulation that required media to be fair and balanced in their broadcasts. Conservatives, who resented the principles of objectivity as a tool of left-leaning media to constrain freedom of speech, seized on this to open a Pandora's box of opportunity.
The Fairness Doctrine said that if you expressed a viewpoint, if somebody had a different viewpoint, they had the right to come on and give a response. So if you took an hour and talked about how bad taxes were, high taxes, you had to give somebody to talk about lower taxes, or a different position on taxes, equal time.
After the repeal of the Fairness Doctrine, more than 1,000 radio stations switched to a talk radio format. Tellingly, conservative on-air minutes outnumbered liberal minutes by a ratio of 10 to 1.
There was a little talk radio out there back when the Fairness Doctrine was in place, but it was bland. People really avoided expressing opinion.
Now, radio hosts could shout about how they felt about controversial issues. Listeners who liked a presenter's position would not only continue to listen in, but would become more resolute on the topic because someone in a position of authority held the same opinion. Of course, the opposite was also true. Listeners who disliked what they were hearing would drop off. But for Rush Limbaugh, this wasn't the case. His listenership covered the political spectrum, and it did so because he was basically a stand-up comedian who simply preferred the radio booth to the stage.
The rap on conservatives always was they didn't have any sense of humor, they couldn't tell a joke, they were pessimistic and sort of had a crabbed view of the world. Well, Rush is none of those things. He's very optimistic. He believes America's best days are ahead of us, much like Ronald Reagan did. He certainly can tell a joke. Even a lot of liberals find him very funny. So in a sense, I think he's taken many of the conservative stereotypes and stood them on their head.
Limbaugh went to town on Clinton, creating skits and songs that skewered Bill's behavior, with impressionist Paul Shanklin mimicking the president's unmistakable Southern twang.
1, 2, 3, 4! Well, she was not 17. Even I know what that means. But at 21, I was in the clear. So I took a chance with another. Whoa, when I saw her derriere.
Limbaugh was on air 18 hours a week with a nationally syndicated show. His comedic attacks continued the acceleration of partisan division that Gingrich had pioneered. Limbaugh used satire like a knife to the heart to make the case that Clinton's transgressions were a mark of his liberalness. Stanky liberal behavior just proved that liberalism was inherently corrupt and misguided. Limbaugh had discovered that partisan humor was a deadly weapon. By making people laugh viciously with him at the Clintons, Limbaugh was building rapport with the millions of Americans who listened in. And with this humiliation humor, Limbaugh forged a new American conservative identity. Tough, down to earth, no bullshit. His influence is noticeable everywhere today. In the bro culture of Vince Vaughn movies, contemporary country music, corporate America, and professional sports. He's influenced Donald Trump's political persona and his policies. Trump regularly listens in to the echo chamber and takes cues about how to frame and position policy from the man who writes the lingua franca of 21st century American conservatism.
Did you know that the White House drug test is a multiple choice test? I was stunned.
Rush Limbaugh and Fox News are the monolithic cornerstones of the conservative entertainment complex. In 2019, both averaged roughly 15.5 million unique listeners or viewers a week, way more than their conservative or liberal-leaning competitors. Counterintuitively maybe, the internet has reinforced the primacy of talk radio and TV broadcasting as the most popular media formats. Rush Limbaugh and Fox News are now more popular than ever. Their listeners and viewers can access the same content online that they catch in real time on the air. This means unique followers become more avid followers, higher value consumers. Because the social web allows for two-way conversation, it strengthens the existing foundations of the echo chamber. Rank-and-file conservative politicians who are building their careers can develop close relationships with Fox News, who'll give them airtime and endorse their election campaigns if they agree to back ideas that the network champions. Conservative interest groups can pay to promote their concerns via Fox News Issues, a website for native advertising that plants key messages with Fox fans in the hope that they remember them, talk about them, and vote for them. But beyond Limbaugh and Fox, the smartphone has contributed to the development of the conservative ecosystem over the past decade in much the same way that it's affected every other subculture. It's become more fragmented and fanatical.
The problem then is you begin to embody the worst of the web. You begin to embody rumours and scandal, things that can't be confirmed, the things that possibly give the web a bad reputation.
Oh, but why is that exclusive to the web domain? I mean, we certainly see that in other medias. That's a 1990s discussion. We're now in a totally new era where information is information. You just really have to set your own threshold in what you believe and where you go for information. Because you're getting it from an established source doesn't mean it's true.
That was Matt Drudge on Sky News back in 2007, shrewdly predicting the future. The Drudge Report was a canary in the mine, a harbinger of the crazy shop that the conservative entertainment complex would become once the social web gave everyone a platform. No other brands in the conservative media complex have had the same sustained success as Rush Limbaugh and Fox News, but newcomers that capture the mood of the day come and go constantly. There was Glenn Beck's Blaze Network.
I don't want a discounted doctor. I don't want discounted wages. I don't want any of this stuff. If I wanted to live in India, I'd live in India. I want not the Indian lifestyle, I want the American lifestyle. I'm sure, no offense to India, I'm sure it's beautiful and everything. I've heard, especially this time of year, especially by the, that one big river they have there that sounds like a disease. Come on, it does. I mean, if somebody said, I'm sorry, you have a really bad case of Ganges, you'd want Cipro.
There was Breitbart, the platform that Trump's strategy guy Steve Bannon briefly ran.
I want a center-right nation to fight for its soul, and its soul is represented in the arts. Its soul is represented in a world in which media is everything. I want the right to enter the world of media to the extent and invest in media the way that the left does. George Soros is throwing money like crazy.
The rapid rise and fall of these businesses creates a competitive market that provides a brilliant launching pad for conservative pundits, who arrive with a controversial splash and get quickly signed to lavish deals. The only industry I can think to compare it to is the porn industry before the internet, or pro wrestling back in the 90s, when every character was cartoonish and flamboyant.
We just might blow the whole planet up, Everybody knows that Hulkamania is the strongest force in this universe. But when I hit that ring and I saw what the madness was all about, I realized there was a whole nother universe out there, a whole nother frontier, and the power of the madness and the mania just blew my 24-inch guns out.
There's a plethora of online conservative provocateurs whose genders, ethnicities, and views represent the diversity of America and contradict the notion that conservatism is a white, middle-class male phenomenon. From blonde bombshells like Tomi Lahren and Laura Ingraham, to the NRA mouthpiece Dana Lash, from Latina Sarah Gonzalez to Filipino-American Michelle Malkin, from Senators Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio to conservative Jews like Ben Shapiro, Jonah Goldberg, and Mark Levin, to Gavin McInnes, the hipster co-founder of Vice magazine. In keeping with the growing fanaticism of the online political conversation, some of these new conservative entertainers live on the fringes of conspiracy theory and chat room trolling. Funnily enough, just as conservatives once made talk radio their own, they're now doing the same with private chat. A 2019 study found that conservatives are significantly more active in issues-focused private Facebook and WhatsApp groups than liberals. Now, not everyone who joins a mobile chat group like this is ideological, but they are more likely to come across extreme partisan content. And steady exposure to extreme content leads to desensitization, which has the effect of pulling people away from the moderate center. This, of course, is part of the radical conservative grassroots strategy. Laughter and conspiracy, like the coronavirus, are great levelers, things that connect people who have similar constitutions, but in other respects are very different. And it was into this febrile conservative atmosphere that Donald Trump landed like a fox in the henhouse.